The morning sun had barely cut through the haze when the platoon assembled on the training field. Boots aligned, spines rigid, breaths measured. The sergeant's footsteps echoed across the ground like hammer strikes. Everyone knew what that meant. He was a man carved from discipline, the kind who never smiled, never hesitated, never saluted first unless the one standing before him had earned a place higher than rank or title. But when she stepped forward quiet, composed, her uniform still too new, her presence strangely steady, the air changed, the whispers died. Even the wind seemed to pause. And as she lifted her chin and locked her gaze ahead, the sergeant did something that sent a shockwave through the entire formation. He raised his hand. He saluted her first. The platoon nearly forgot to breathe. No one understood why. A recruit being saluted by a hardened veteran? Unthinkable, impossible. But the sergeant held that salute with a respect so rare, so absolute, that it told everyone there was a story behind this silent moment, one heavy enough to bend protocol itself. The days leading up to that moment had been filled with questions about her. She barely spoke, moved with a precision no beginner should have, and carried herself with a calm too controlled to be ordinary. Recruits whispered theories at night: Special Forces dropout, former intelligence operative, someone with a dark past? But none of the rumors matched the way she quietly blended into the background, or the haunted discipline in her eyes. She followed orders with perfect execution, but never sought praise. She didn't laugh, didn't boast, didn't seem fazed by anything, not the grueling drills, not the sergeant's barked commands, not the unspoken pressure that she didn't belong. And yet, every time she moved, something about her felt. Practiced, earned, forged somewhere far harsher than a training ground. So, when the formation stood frozen after the sergeant's salute, it wasn't just confusion that spread through the ranks, it was realization. The kind that sinks slowly, like a weight dropping into deep water. Something had happened long before she set foot on that field. Something the sergeant knew. Something none of them could guess. And that silent salute was not a mistake. It was a message, one that echoed louder than any command he had ever shouted. She was no ordinary recruit. She was someone whose past demanded honor before she even spoke her name. When she arrived at the training ground, her presence barely caused a ripple, just another new recruit with a fresh uniform and a quiet demeanor. But soldiers noticed things. They noticed how she stood a little too straight, how her footsteps were always measured, how her eyes didn't dart around like a newcomer's but analyzed every corner as if she were returning to familiar ground. Rumors spread faster than orders. Some said she had been transferred from a classified unit. Others whispered that she once operated in enemy territory without backup. One soldier swore he had seen her photo in a restricted file, though he couldn't prove it. But none of them could explain why the sergeant, the man who never overlooked weaknesses, watched her with a strange, unreadable expression. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't show off during drills. And when others joked or complained, she simply listened, absorbing everything with a calm that made even seasoned fighters uneasy. They tried to push her, test her, break her silence, but nothing cracked. It was as if she carried invisible weight on her shoulders. Something heavy enough to silence her past, yet strong enough to steady her present. The platoon didn't know it yet, but her past was about to collide with their future. The sergeant was a man who had trained thousands, broken hundreds, and respected only a handful. His eyes were sharp enough to spot hesitation from across the field, and his voice could grind confidence into dust. But the moment he saw her, really saw her, something shifted in his posture. He didn't bark at her the way he did with the others. Instead, he watched, observed, calculated. During drills, he would pause just a moment longer when she performed a task. During evaluations, he never corrected her form because she never needed correcting. And during tactical exercises, he noticed something none of the recruits realized. Her instincts were not learned. They were ingrained. When she scanned an area, she did it like someone who had survived ambush. When she moved, she did it like someone accustomed to staying alive in places where seconds mattered. The platoon assumed she was lucky. The sergeant knew better. He recognized that kind of precision. He had seen it once before years ago in a classified mission. Few survived. And the more he watched her, the more certain he became she wasn't just trained. She was seasoned. Someone who bore the quiet marks of battlefield experience, even if her uniform claimed otherwise. The shift happened during a timed drilla scenario designed to overwhelm, confuse, and expose weaknesses. Smoke grenades hissed, sirens screamed, and the platoon raced across the obstacle course in frantic bursts. Most recruits stumbled under pressure, shouting commands that clashed, movements chaotic. But she moved like water flowing, adjusting, slipping through the chaos with unnerving ease. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. Every step was deliberate, every decision instant and razor-sharp. When a simulated explosion knocked 2 recruits off balance, she pulled them out without breaking stride. When the path forward collapsed into confusion, she recalculated routes faster than the instructors could track. By the time they reached the final checkpoint, the sergeant was no longer evaluating her. He was remembering. Her movements were too familiar. The efficiency, the silence, the situational awareness, every detail screamed experience from a life she wasn't supposed to reveal. The platoon crossed the checkpoint panting, coughing, drenched in sweat. She arrived seconds later, barely winded, eyes still scanning for threats even after the drill ended. That was the moment the sergeant knew the truth beyond doubt. She wasn't learning the routine, she was restraining herself. And whatever she was holding back was something the platoon wasn't ready to understand. Word spread across the base that the sergeant had requested a private review session for her alone. Recruits whispered theories late into the night, imagining confrontations, secret promotions, or hidden failures, but none of them were prepared for what actually happened. The review wasn't physical, it was silent. The sergeant placed a small metal insignia on the table between them. It was worn, scratched, and unmistakable. A mark belonging only to those who had survived an operation so brutal that most records of it were sealed away forever. Her eyes flicked to the insignia for only a second, but it was enough. The sergeant saw recognition, raw, painful recognition. She said nothing, but silence was enough. He understood. She had been there, the mission no one spoke of. The one that took lives, erased identities, and left only ghosts behind. The sergeant leaned back, but there was no anger in his expression, only respect, deep, unshakable respect. He dismissed her without another word. And from that moment on, the platoon noticed a change. The sergeant's tone softened around her. His commands carried a different weight, because now he wasn't training a recruit. He was honoring a survivor whose rank was written in scars, not stripes. The morning of the ceremony arrived quietly, with a mist rolling across the training field. Recruits stood at attention, expecting another routine inspection. The sergeant marched forward, expression stern as always, but today, he carried something different in his eyes, a decision. He approached the formation, boots striking the ground with purpose. Then he stopped in front of her. The platoon held its breath. She stood perfectly still, posture flawless, eyes forward. But everyone saw the tension in her shoulders, the weight of secrets she never spoke, and then the impossible happened. The sergeant's hand rose. His fingers touched his brow. The salute was crisp, controlled, and filled with a respect no one there had ever seen. Gasps rippled silently through the ranks. A sergeant saluting first was unheard of, against protocol. Reserved only for decorated heroes war legends, those whose names were carved into history. But she stood there in a recruit's uniform. She didn't blink. She didn't falter. She simply returned the salute with quiet dignity, a gesture that felt like the closing of a chapter she had never chosen to share. The platoon understood nothing of her past, but they saw the truth in that moment. She wasn't being honored for what she would become. She was being honored for what she had already survived. As the sun dipped behind the barracks and the parade ground cooled into twilight, she finally let herself breathe. The day that began with whispers and smirks had ended with a sergeant's salute echoing across the base, not out of protocol, but out of respect she had carved with grit, precision, and an unbreakable will. The younger recruits who once measured her by her size now measured themselves against her standard. And the veterans, the ones who thought they had seen every kind of soldier, realized they were witnessing something rare, a warrior who carried her strength quietly. Until the world needed it loud, she didn't celebrate, she didn't boast. She simply walked back toward the armory, boots crunching on gravel, the evening wind tugging at her sleeves. because she knew this was never about proving them wrong, it was about proving herself right. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new doubts, new battles in the dirt and the dark. But tonight she had rewritten the rules without saying a word. And somewhere behind her, the sergeant watched her fade into the shadows, knowing the truth the whole base would soon learn, that sometimes the fiercest soldier is the one they underestimate first,